You don't have this handout, so I will get it on the web for you. Well, Joel will, I guess. Okay. You know, we're talking about efficiency, right? So is it better to do preventive maintenance, spend a little money up front, or wait till something blows up and replace it? I'd rather spend a little money up front, right? So this thing here of repairing, or even before repairing, versus failure. You know, and a lot of adages, you know, you talk to the Marines, well, failure is not an option. Well, it isn't. And it's not in this case either. If I'm dealing with a $100,000 engine, a $500,000 piece of equipment that's going to cut my crop, failure is not an option, right? So if we're talking about efficiency, your producers need to be, and trust me, I have been down this road more than once. They have to be a lot more proactive about what they're doing as far as maintenance with their machinery and pieces of equipment. I don't care if it's their diesel pickup or if it's their $500,000 combine. I could care less. Most of my customers, you know, I kind of educated them on what they should be doing, which is what you guys are going to be doing. You'll come across some that no way, no how. Ain't going to happen. We'll just wait till it breaks, then we'll fix it. Well, fine, that's back on them. You know, you do your bit. Others are actually way ahead of the curve. They're doing this preventive maintenance as we speak right now, okay? So this is the repair versus failure, which leads to lower cost, reduced downtime, increase in component life. These components are very, very expensive, okay? Maintain the fleet value. Some of your customers are going to have some older equipment because they like the equipment, it works for them. They're probably never going to trade it off, ever. Some of your customers are going to trade every 2 years. I've got customers who are on a lease return deal. Every 2 years, they get a new tractor, all right? Well, to do that, they have to maintain that fleet value, okay? So if you're doing this preventive maintenance, or your producers are doing preventive maintenance, that adds to that value. So that 2-year-old tractor, the difference, the cost, the dollar value that they write out that check for between what they have and what they're buying, if they can increase this value, that gets a whole lot smaller. So it's more bang for their buck. Okay, it's more efficient. Okay? Consistency from job to job. That's where we would need to use the same lab for our samples. All right, because different labs may have slightly different techniques of measuring or you know, looking at the samples, different machines, an IFR versus TSR, whatever. So if you stick with the same lab, you'll have that consistency. Okay. And these labs are kind of big. And actually, I'll show you a lab here after lunch. We're going to take a little field tour. We're going to look at a lab. We were donated a lab. One of our, well, I've mentioned the name Kiewit. They used to do their own oil sampling. They predominantly run Caterpillar equipment. You know, anything from a little tractor up to a, you know, $7.2 million haul truck. And they are very, very religious about oil sampling. They used to do their own oil sampling. The gentleman that did it retired. Well, unfortunately, they hadn't thought far enough ahead, and they didn't have anyone trained to take his place. So what they did was they sent all their samples to Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois. And they were actually on a 24-hour turnaround. And they mothballed their equipment. Then when we built this building, they actually donated it to us. That was a $750,000 donation. This is some pretty serious stuff. And it fits in a pissant little room, but it's kind of cool to work. Trust me, it's a tiny room when you see it after lunch. You'll agree with me, Emily. Okay. This here is a way bigger than what we have here, but it's the same type of machine where you can actually go in, and what it does, when the oil is heated up to a certain temperature, then it's actually sprayed through light. And when the light goes through, it's reflected, different metals will reflect back different colors. And that's how they can figure out what metals are in the oil. It's kind of cool, actually. In fact, I think it heats it up to 10,000 degrees Kelvin, which someone told me is hotter than the surface of the sun. That's pretty freaking hot.
So do you think producers, are they going to be more apt to send it to like an independent lab as opposed to John Deere or Caterpillar, because there's maybe that fear that, well, they're going to give me the worst case scenario so that I have to buy a new tractor or whatever?
That's a very valid point. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure how to answer that. I can look at it two ways. You're exactly right. Well, I think that's a John Deere. They're going to fabricate the information and they're going to come and sell me a new tractor. Number one, I doubt very much if John Deere would do that. In fact, I know they wouldn't, but that fear is there, absolutely, or whoever. The other thing is price. Your independents may be a little bit cheaper, but might also be, well, you're going to get what you pay for type of thing too. So I can kind of look at that several different ways. That's, I guess I've never been asked that before. That's a damn good question. If I was in your shoes, I would be recommending, nothing against the independents at all, but I would be recommending that they got John Deere equipment, check with John Deere first. Yeah. And if they can get on some sort of maintenance plan, then the cost is really negligible because they're on the plan anyway type of thing. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. What do the rest of you guys think? Any comments on that? I've never been asked
Well,
that
I've got a
before.
producer that owns the John Deere dealership, so he gets new equipment every year, or every 2 years, and then sells it to the other producers. So he has to maintain it
Right.
to have it look pretty new. In fact, I think there's vacuums in every tractor, so his
Good.
crew, when
Good.
they get done for the day, I mean, it looks like it came off the showroom floor, and they park it like, outside the field, and I mean, it's all parked perfectly, straight. And
Oh,
square,
sure.
and,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, he gets a new combine every year, and his equipment's pretty nice. I mean,
Well, if he's reselling it, it has to be, absolutely.
and so he's got to maintain that,
Right.
because other people aren't going to come buy his junk.
Yeah.
If,
Yeah.
but
I
Yeah.
guess I would probably think that the company, the manufacturer of your equipment would understand how severe those results are better than some independent. If there was some trend that was detected, they would be able to explain that in relation to that same model, make and model,
Right.
better than if you get it from an independent source.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of your lubricant suppliers have their own program to track how well their oils
Right.
perform.
Right.
It's Conoco in their labs are wholesale.
Okay.
They
sure.
were tracking to see if their oil was breaking
Right.
down.
And I wonder if a manufacturer would keep track of that information to implement a recall at some point if they were seeing.
Anything like that would keep track of. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess my thought on it, Tim, is I would just be happy if they sent it in anywhere.
Regardless,
Some
Yeah, that's true.
producers break out in hives when you mention the word dealership. And so if they at least get it sent down to an independent, and some guys might just send it out as an independent for ease if they've been working with the guy for a long time. And if they've got Cat, John Deere,
That was gonna be my point, yeah.
Versatile, and if they can just send it to one
Yep.
spot, I know they're gonna have a tendency to do that more than, some of them are particular, don't get me wrong, but more tendency to just bundle it because they can get prepaid shipping too.
Right.
And
Right.
get back, especially with that filling, so they're usually pretty good.
Mhm. Yeah. And so that's the point I was going to raise. If they have multiple manufacturers on the one property, it's a lot easier just to send it in because then we're back to that consistency. If you have old John Deere equipment, you send it to John Deere, it's going to be consistent, right? You have a Komatsu or John Deere and Versatile, well, that consistency may not be there. If you send it off to John Deere, to Case IH or whatever, they're using different labs. So if you stick with the one lab, but even though if you send a Versatile sample out of a Cummins engine, a Versatile 875 into John Deere, they're still going to do the sample. So you still will have that consistency there. Yeah. So, and that's good points. It might be just back to personal preference too. There's, I got customers too. You mentioned the word. Well, some you just don't mention the word dealership around them in a conversation. And I say that pretty seriously too. I got one customer who, boy, that's just the way they are. So that's where the independents would come in. Yeah. A lot of the taking the sample, running the sample is pretty straightforward. The issue is determining what the results are. Looking for those trend lines. What are we actually looking for? Is this, one mineral might be creeping up, but is that really a problem? Maybe that's just normal wear. So interpreting those results, that's where the crux of it is. And that's where, an independent, if he or she's got the training, is plumb fine. And I know Caterpillar, they have extremely rigorous training on that. One of my students, Jim Longenbar, he's out in Peoria, and he was telling me the training he went through. Holy crap. It's like, way above my head. Way above my head.
So are they trained to, if you're not very consistent about sending your samples in, are they trained that, they see the trend on that type of manufacturer product? Or, if you're randomly sending samples every...
Well, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Like if it went to John Deere, obviously they have real experience with a certain model.
You have a database built up,
But
yeah.
where an independent lab, I would hope they have that experience, but...
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And that's would be back on your producer to make sure that those samples are set in regularly, because that's the only way they're going to get any type of a trend line. If you do it, once here and then maybe wait a couple of years and do another one, that's only $10, but it's $10 he just wasted, right? So the part of that it would be the consistency of getting those samples in. But yeah, you're correct. So John Deere, if they're looking at John Deere samples, they probably have this huge database where if they notice a trend line, they know what's a model of a John Deere tractor. I'm not real familiar with John Deere's. An 8130 is a John Deere tractor, right? Sure, we'll go with that. Sounds good. 8130 John Deere tractor. They have a database so that if they see a trend line in your tractor, they'll compare that. Well, you know what? We saw the same trend line with several other of these. We might want to look and see what's going on here. It's not just this tractor. It's with a lot of the same model. And the hours are comparable too. So now they need to regroup, talk to their engineers, and well, did we put the wrong coating on the pistons? Whatever. So yeah.
That's what I was going to say is that the manufacturers used to have to change their design.
Absolutely they do. Yeah.
They'll say high chromium and a number of different samples. They might change the design of their...
Yeah, which they probably would. Right. Back to those engineers. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, maybe.
Is there if you have producers who are looking to send stuff to an independent lab, what should they be looking for in that lab, to see if they're reputable or qualified to get the right information back? What questions should they ask the lab as far as the testing goes? Or
yeah, good question.
Things like that?
I would, if it was me, I would be looking for references. I would be, crap. I would get onto the web. Come on, baby.
We're asking too many questions, apparently.
No, you're not. Absolutely not.
Question time is over now.
I would be looking for references, and I would just ask them right up front, who can I call that will vouch for what you do? And if they give you references, that's great. If they kind of hum and har, then I would kind of hum and har about that one. I'd get on the web and see if anyone's posted anything about them. You just Google them, do whatever. I would go and visit the place and see so you're looking for the professionalism, you're looking for the type of equipment they have,
Yeah, that's
for
kind of
cleanliness.
what type of equipment is better to do the testing, versus one way or the other? Is there different ways to do the testing? Which way works better than?
I'm not sure if one way works better than the other. There's different ways of testing it. To me, it depends greatly on, has the operator who's taking the test been trained on that equipment? And I was trained on this equipment out here several years ago. If we were to go out there right now, I don't think so. Not going to happen. And I took 3 days of training on that, and to me, it was pretty intensive. But at the end of the day, compared with what my friend Jim has gone through in Illinois, my training was nothing, absolutely nothing. He's been through months of training. So that would be another question to ask, well, what's your training been? Asked to see the certificates of the training, the certificates of the calibration of the test equipment, a log of all the training of who's using it. Joel might be trained on the machine, But I'm doing the testing, I haven't got any training. Well, that doesn't really mean a whole lot, right? So as long as if Joel's done the training and Joel's done the testing, you're good to go. I have no business doing it because I haven't had the training, but I might be put on that machine to do the testing. You know, the testing itself is not really the critical issue. The issue is how to interpret the results. And that's what basically Jim went through with his training, was how to interpret those results. And he said it's tough. It's very, very tough. Yeah. That's good. Good questions, guys. Really good questions.
Steve, just out of curiosity, if we had a question like that pop up, I know I could probably email you, but do you mind if some of the other extension agents email you?
Oh, no, absolutely. I'll get you my business card before you leave. Absolutely. Yeah. I respond, what, within a couple of weeks?
Maybe
No,
a little
look-
sooner if you leave a couple voicemails.
Yeah. Turnaround time. Yeah. Well, then I see who it's from first, though. See, just messing with you, Nicole.
Does Northern hire outlet, do they take samples? Can you pay Northern to do them?
You know, I can check for you. I'm not sure.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I could sure, because I know this is a. We have Board of Regents here next week, and the Board of Regents is hopefully going to pass that this bioenergy center is a designated test center for MSU. All right, so that's actually kind of a status thing, but it's supposed to be self-funding, so that is where they will take in outside work. So yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't do that, but I'll sure try and find out for you. Yeah. In fact, the guy that's coming tomorrow morning, let's ask him.
Oh, yeah.
Randy. Yeah, we'll ask him. Good question. Now, one thing that, we got the lubrication, where the sampling, the interpretation and analysis of the results. Follow-up is also the other thing, all right? If there is a spike in a trend or an increasing trend line with a particular metal, then that lab needs to let your customer, your producer know, all right? I know John Deere and Caterpillar and the lab that a lot of my customers work with in Billings, they were outstanding. I did have a couple of customers that had some wear metals that were increasing alarming rate, and one of them actually got a phone call. He sent it off on I'm just going to say like a Tuesday, and by noon the Wednesday he had a phone call to tell him to shut the engine down. It was going to be a catastrophic failure. So that saved my customer. It cost me some money because I could have rebuilt the engine, but it saved my customer a lot of money. All right, so that's also part of the mix, is that turnaround time. If everything's good, maybe a couple of days or 3 days, you'll get a email. Typically it's going to be email now. But everything's good. Keep doing what you're doing. Send your next sample at X number of hours or whatever.
So, let's say that we are recommending to implement this oil testing program to a farmer. I don't know, when would you consider the easiest way to slip it into their maintenance program? I mean, would you recommend it? I know some guys like to change oils after they're done harvesting, to kind of just, before they put it away for the winter, and then they do an oil test then after they've been running it, especially like the combine or something like that. Do you have any recommendations for anything like that, Steve? That way it's just kind of a habit that they do it?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a key word, is it just has to be put in there, is to become a habit to do it. Seasonal can be kind of a tougher one. If you're using like a loader tractor, you're using it for whatever during the summertime and fall, then you use it for feeding hay in the wintertime, and something else in the spring where you're using it all year round. It's a whole lot easier to put that into a program, because you're going to be doing through the whole year different seasons, but the whole year you're going to be doing regular oil changes, all right? Now seasonal, well, that's a little bit different ballgame. We're using that combine for 4 weeks out of the year, then you're parking the damn thing. I would still, the preventive maintenance program, I don't care if it's seasonal or year round or whatever, there's a program for every piece of equipment on that property. Gas pickup, diesel pickup, combine, tractor, the ATV, all right? There's a preventive maintenance program that should be in place for every one of those. So if that oil sampling is part of that program, it would become a habit to do that. Yeah, and that's probably a key word they use it right there. Is they just got to get into the habit of doing it. Yeah, and it's not a tough thing to do. They're going to drop the oil anyway, right? Well, you just have this teeny little bottle that you just siphon off, and you clean it off. You put it in its seal it up, put in its little, and most of them come with a mailing box, all right, a little cardboard box, put the name on, and in fact, most of them even have a damn label right on there. Put your own return address and ship them off. Yeah, but the big part of, well, let me ask you this, are any of your producers right now using consistent oil sampling that you know of? Okay. I would suggest it'd be a good question to ask. And I would, and again, if they want to call me, have them call me. Or Greg Klaus is another person they can call. We're huge advocates of oil sampling. It should be part of every preventive maintenance program. All the way from your big combines down to your little two-wheel dirt bikes. All right? If they're using them to make money, then oil sampling will make the money at the end of the day. Yeah. Just get in the habit of doing it. Yeah. Okay, good questions, guys. We talked a little about minerals and synthetic type stuff. One that we haven't really talked about that's not real, I'm not sure how big this is in Montana. It's not real big around these parts. But other states, oils developed from vegetable matter is becoming a big thing. All right, real big thing. So there's, I guess you look at two ways. Some of the cost is less, but like biodiesel actually costs more than regular diesel right now. But it's saving on the natural resources. It's biodegradable, blah, blah, blah. So this is something that I'm not real familiar with, but it's maybe something that might be coming up here in the near future for us. Okay. Oil additives. This would get to where we're going to mix manufacturers or mix different viscosities because of the different additive packages. Just be, advise your producers to be pretty careful about that, okay? Some of those additive packages, they might mix up very, very well. Others are going to fight each other, and you're going to lose the properties of everything, all right? And you can see what a lot of them are. So detergents, cleaners, oxidation inhibitors, dispersants, and the list goes on. This is a big one right here, anti-wear agents, all right, which deals with the shear property. So we put oil under pressure. If we don't have a shear property, we actually tear the oil apart, that oil film apart. We're going to have metal-to-metal contact, which kind of defeats the purpose of having oil in there in the first place, all right? So we lose that anti-shear and anti-wear agents, you will damage components, okay? Films, so we have sliding bearings, a lot of pressure that's going in between those bearings. The film thickness is only about 100 microns, and most of your wear is at low speed. So the worst thing you can do to an engine is turn that key on and fire that thing up, all right? Because you don't have any oil pressure there, right? You got zero oil pressure until you build oil pressure, okay? The second thing is lugging. You heard the term lugging the engine? So we're going to look at some engine, what we call an engine performance curve. And they're available for, I got some old engine, I got some brand spanking new engine curves. So we're looking at horsepower versus RPM, and we're looking at torque versus RPM, okay? A torque curve will actually increase as we start going down in RPM. All right, until we reach a thing called peak torque. So torque is the rotational force that's coming out the back end of that engine. All right, and that's actually measured. Horsepower is actually a mathematical calculation. We're not measuring horsepower. We never will measure because you can't measure horsepower. It's actually a mathematical calculation. We'll talk more about that one later. So once I reach that peak torque and I keep coming down in RPM, I've got the plow too heavy in the ground, the hill's too steep for my truck, whatever, and I come over that peak torque, my torque starts going down, my RPM starts going down, and that engine's going to die. We're going to kill that engine. That's where we reach that point called lugging. All right, when we look at those performance curves, we'll kind of see where that's at. And that's going to vary upon application, vary with engine manufacturer, with the horsepower, the way the fuel system's set up. It's not a standard figure, okay? Anti-friction bearings, film thickness is a whole lot thinner. the bearing and race actually deform so the surface is conform under a load. Okay, so we're actually going to have basically a change in formation as we start putting stress or load on that particular instance. Okay. Boundary lubrication, gear surfaces and some bearings, high temperature, low speeds, aspirated contact, that's contact between the metals, and also some high loads. Okay. This is where EP or extreme pressure additives come in. This is also true with grease. You know, a lot of you greases have an EP rating on the side of the grease container. So grease is not a grease, is not a grease. Looks like oil is not an oil, is not an oil. It's application specific. A lot of your producers will pick a grease, and that's going to grease every cotton picking grease zerk on the face of this earth. End of conversation. Why? Because we only want to carry one grease gun and one cartridge of grease, which I can understand that. I get that. But the ratings may not be the same, all right? Most of your greases, I'm kind of digressing from this, but it's still lubrication. Most of the greases have a GL rating. Gear lubrication, most of the greases are a GL5, right? But some are not EP, right? So this here, EP, extreme pressure, all right? So if you're under, you know, again, back to our little favorite, the owner's manual, that will tell what the manufacturer recommends as far as a grease for, you know, a particular U-joint or drive line or whatever on whatever piece of equipment, okay? So make sure they kind of adhere to that, all right? We have different types of wear, adhesive, abrasive cavitation. I think we're going to go through some of these. We'll just kind of zip through these real quick. So metal-to-metal contact, we do not want to see this. This is really bad. So this is where we've got the wrong type of oil, or it could be grease, and we've lost our shear properties, okay? So we've actually torn apart that layer of grease or layer of oil, and we're going to start having metal-metal contact, okay? We'll look at some injectors this afternoon. The injectors are lubricated internally with diesel fuel. Okay, some of those injectors, all injectors, they have a barrel, which doesn't move. They have a plunger inside the barrel, which does move. Well, the barrel's metal, the plunger's metal, so I better have something between those two. Well, that's going to be a really thin film of fuel, diesel fuel. So if I get hot fuel, am I going to tear that layer of fuel apart and have metal-to-metal contact and possibly have a seized injector? Yeah, all right. So we're going to talk about the fuel components this afternoon. One of those components is some way to cool that fuel. You absolutely, number one, hot fuel, well, that's just a bomb ready to blow up. Seriously, it is. What you see in those Hollywood movies where the diesel tank blows up, actually could happen. 9 times out of 10 it won't, but it actually could happen, all right? So we'll talk about that this afternoon. So metal to metal, and a lot of our different components, you know, bearings and crankshaft journals and diesel injectors, we have to have that lubrication in there, okay? Contamination with, you know, dirt, rust. Well, here's a new one, paint, okay? I have seen customers paint the insides of oil pans. Why, I'm not exactly sure, but it probably wasn't a good idea because that paint is not going to stick, is not going to peel off, and oh, where does it end up? Oh, that would be through the oil lubrication system, right? Well, is a paint chip a real good way to keep things from not, yeah, exactly. Okay, so be kind of aware of this one here. Hydraulic and cooling systems, we've talked a little about cavitation, okay? So here's our bubble, all right? There's an air bubble. Under pressure, low pressure, just kind of, you know, pushes in and out, not a big deal. Under high pressure, that bubble will actually implode, and it will start picking away at the metal. A really good one of that is on the cooling system. I talked about that earlier, and I'll show you a sleeve out of an engine where we actually, it's a steel sleeve, and they had cavitation, they had air bubbles in the cooling system, and it literally picked a hole through that metal sleeve. And you know, sounds kind of crazy, but I'll dig that out this afternoon and show you guys. Okay, it does happen. Chemical reactions. Galvanic is typically between two dissimilar metals. I've seen a lot of this in chassis where you have, they're not real common, but some semi-trucks do have aluminum frames. So now we start bolting on steel leaf springs, for example. Well, that's two dissimilar metals, so now we're going to have some galvanic corrosion. And that will actually start eating away at that metal. Okay? Erosion, small particles at high speed. Kind of like some of us are feeling, they just get flat, tired, and wore out. You know what? There's really not a lot you can do about that. That's just the way life is. Okay? So rolling contact, sliding contact, if they do get wore out, well, it's just the way that's going to be. You're going to have to replace components. Okay? Sliding contact, if we don't, you know, we have one stationary and one rolling, so we're going to start chipping off here. Here we have rolling contact. If we don't have that film, we have a crack. We'll start chipping off again. By the way, this chunk of metal is now free to go through the lubrication system. It will hopefully get caught up in the filter, hopefully. Okay, it's got to go through other components before it gets to the filter, though, is the downside of that. Okay. Secondary condition, larger hard particles. So here we're actually going to start chunking out. They actually might get caught in here. They'll start cracking out these other surfaces as they pass through. Cracks lead to more cracks. Then this will actually chunk out and start going through. There's a kind of a compounding effect. Instrumentation. This is kind of what they're going to be measuring or checking for at the laboratory. All right, so wear metals, oil conditioning, cleanliness, and the viscosity. This one here, be a good idea to let your producers know that if their piece of equipment, their rear end, their transmission, their engine is under warranty, one of the first, if this is a failure, one of the first things a manufacturer will do will take an oil sample. If the oil is the wrong viscosity, guess what just happened to the warranty? It went bye-bye. All right, that is one of the first things they will do is check that viscosity. Okay, if I'm a manufacturer on the hook for a $100,000 engine, and there's a lot of those out there on your producers' farms and ranches, and that producer used the wrong oil, guess what? I'm not going to warranty that engine. Why the hell should I? Okay, so it's pretty critical, and it's a lot of things that most of your producers will kind of, you know, it's not that they dismiss it, they just really don't know. Okay, so viscosity is a big thing. Wear metals, we're not going to go through all these. You know, if I know what most of these are, you guys probably know more than what I do. So these are your wear metals that they're looking at. But they're not, you know, the very first one's going to be your baseline. They're looking for trends of increases. These metals are going to be in specific components in the transmission or in the rear end or in the engine. And they will be able to determine then what is possibly going to fail. All right. FTIR, we actually have an FTIR instrument, and I'll show you that after lunch. We're not going to go through all that. In an engine, if we have an increase or a high viscosity, we might have soot, glycol, that would come from a cooling system, a failed head gasket, cracked head, cracked block, or maybe the incorrect oil. If we have low viscosity, we might have, again, the incorrect oil. We might be diluted with fuel. And we're going to talk a little this afternoon about idling. One of my absolute pet peeves is this damn idling. I mean, if you want to tick me off, pick me up in the wintertime and just run me by Walmart or IGA. I will hit the frickin' roof with this little idling thing that's going on, okay? So we will talk about that this afternoon and why we don't want to do it. Because one thing is this right here. If I idle, so let's just cut to the chase, okay? Damn it. So if I idle the engine, my engine temperature goes down because it's not under load, correct? So if my engine temperature goes down, then the temperature inside the combustion chamber logically will go down, correct? Yes? All right, so my combustion temperature goes down. Am I going to burn all the fuel? The answer is no. Okay? If I don't burn the fuel, then where's it going to go? Some's going to go out the exhaust pipe, right? Well, guess what? Some of it is going to wash down the cylinder walls, and it will end up in the oil. So that's where I'm going to start diluting the oil. And that's my biggest pet peeve. You know, theoretically an engine shouldn't make oil, right? If I put in 5 gallons, I shouldn't dump out 5.5 gallons. If I do, then, well, either I've got a gold mine or I've got a serious problem. Typically, I've got a serious problem. So if I am making oil, there's typically only 2 places that makeup oil can come from. It's either coolant or it's fuel. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be fuel because we have idled the damn engine.
So that's after it's already warm. Is that different than starting your car when it's cold and letting it idle? Let it
Exactly
warm
the
up?
same thing. That's another pet peeve of mine too. While
So
we're
you're
on that
better off
subject.
getting in a cold vehicle and just driving it.
Driving it slowly, all right, until the engine warms up. Or if we're in the field, we would go in a lower gear with a lighter load and let the engine warm up on its own. You will never, ever, ever warm an engine up in an idle. It's physically impossible. Okay? Now, with that being said, if most of our engines, idle maybe 700-800 RPM. If you're to bump that idle up to maybe 1100-1200, then yeah, you're going to solve a lot of problems. Now we're going to get the engine moving a little bit. It's going to start warming up a whole lot quicker to operating temperature. Yeah. So if you have to idle, bump up the idle RPM.
So after you've used the piece of equipment hard for the day, a lot of guys will let it sit and idle down. Is that?
So there's my third pet peeve.
Well, I mean, they do it all the time.
Yes,
so.
they do. You're absolutely correct. They do. My advice is when they get into the yard, maybe idle about 3 to 5 minutes and shut that thing down. Because you're actually doing more harm than good. Just let the bearings cool down, let the oil cool down a little, shut it off. Because you're actually doing more harm because your combustion temperatures are dropping and you're not burning that fuel. You're wasting fuel, and if we have an EGR on there, well, that's a whole different issue. We're going to start plugging up EGR valves. You're going to start diluting the oil. You're going to start plugging up injector tips. That unburned, partially burned fuel will start plugging up your valves, your injector tips. It'll get into your ring lands. You're going to start seizing up your rings. So now you're going to lose combustion pressure. So it just kind of builds on itself. Yeah. So idling seriously is oh boy, is that a pet peeve. Hi.
Hi.
How are you? Come on in.
Thanks. It's time for lunch.
Wow. And you are?
I'm Nyla.
Oh, they told me you might be a smidgen late. Yeah. I'm Stephen. Pleased to meet you, Milo. Welcome.
Please continue.
You're welcome. Come on and grab a seat. Gosh darn it, it's about lunchtime, isn't it? Okay. Good place to call it for lunch?
Sure.
Okay, so I believe we're on our own for lunch. So you guys kind of familiar with the eating establishments around town? Kind of halfway familiar? What's that?
We have enough people that know